A Manhattan billionaire, Marcus Blackstone, saw a smile that broke through his bulletproof world. Across 4 lanes of traffic, Zara Williams, the passionate director of a Harlem community center, became his obsession. But Zara's center was facing an eviction notice and needed $2.3 million to survive a sum Marcus could pay with a pen stroke. Instead, he approached her with a lie, calling himself Marcus Blake. When Zara discovered his true identity, she had one devastating question: are you here to save us, or just buy the building and turn it into luxury condos? Marcus now faces the ultimate choice: write a check and disappear, or fight to earn the trust of the woman who hates everything he is. This is the story of a billionaire who had to lose everything to learn what real wealth means. Hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world, and your stories inspire the content I create. Manhattan's financial district pulses with ambition every morning at 7 a.m. sharp. Glass towers pierce the gray sky like monuments to greed, and among them stands the crown jewel, Blackstone Financial. 37 floors of pure corporate dominance. The elevator climbs silently to the penthouse office where Marcus Blackstone commands his empire from behind bulletproof glass and a heart twice as impenetrable. 42 years old, net worth $8.7 billion, 0 relationships longer than 3 months. Marcus learned early that love was just another currency people used to manipulate you. And he'd built his fortune by never making that mistake twice. His office walls displayed no family photos, no personal mementos, just stock certificates and acquisition papers that told the story of a man who chose power over people every single time. The mahogany desk stretched between him and the world like a battlefield, and Marcus preferred it that way: clean, controlled, completely alone. But 30 blocks south in Harlem, a different kind of empire was being built, one smile at a time. Zara Williams unlocked the doors of Roots and Rhythms, her community center, as the first rays of sunlight painted the brownstone buildings gold. 28 years old, master's degree in social work, bank account with more dreams than dollars. But somehow she made magic happen every single day. Children's laughter echoed from the after-school programs. Seniors found friendship in the evening chess tournaments, and young entrepreneurs pitched their ideas in the small business workshops. She ran every Thursday night. Her grandmother's voice still whispered in her ear some mornings: "Baby girl, you got hands that heal hearts and a spirit that lifts souls. Don't you ever let this world make you small." Zara never intended to stay small. She'd grown up in these same streets, watched her community struggle, and decided she'd be the change instead of waiting for someone else to care. The center ran on grants, donations, and pure determination. The kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in stock prices, but changed lives in ways money never could. The collision of their worlds began with something as simple as a wrong turn and a GPS that lied. Marcus's driver had called in sick that Thursday morning, forcing the billionaire behind the wheel of his black Bentley for the first time in months. A construction detour rerouted him through streets he'd never seen, past murals that told stories of struggle and triumph, beyond bodegas where old men played dominoes and music spilled from open windows like liquid. Sunshine. His phone buzzed with urgent messages about a merger worth $200 million. But traffic had trapped him at a red light directly across from Roots and Rhythms. That's when he saw her. Zara emerged from the center's front door. Her natural hair caught the morning light like a crown, her laugh carrying across the street as she high-fived a group of teenagers heading to school. She wore a simple sundress the color of summer rain, but she moved like royalty through her kingdom of concrete and hope. For exactly 12 seconds, Marcus forgot about mergers and markets and the fortress he'd built around his heart. She looked up at that precise moment, caught his stare through the Bentley's tinted window, and smiled. Not the calculated smile he knew from boardrooms and charity galas, but something real and warm and completely unguarded, something that reached across 4 lanes of traffic and 20 years of emotional scar tissue to touch a part of him he'd forgotten existed. The light turned green. Traffic moved. The moment shattered like expensive crystal hitting marble floors. But that smile, it followed him into his office, haunted his morning meetings, and made him lose focus during a conference call with Tokyo investors. Marcus Blackstone, who could calculate profit margins while negotiating hostile takeovers, couldn't stop thinking about a woman whose name he didn't even know. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows that afternoon, looking south toward Harlem, wondering if she was still smiling somewhere in that maze of brownstones and dreams. His assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission, the only person brave enough to interrupt his brooding sessions. "Sir, the Morrison acquisition papers need your signature, and the Times wants a quote about the quarterly projections." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was remembering the way sunlight had danced in her eyes, the easy grace with which she'd moved through what was clearly her world, her domain, her purpose. That night, alone in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Marcus found himself researching community organizations in Harlem, not for tax write-offs or corporate social responsibility initiatives, but because he needed to understand what kind of woman could make him question 20 years of carefully constructed isolation, with nothing but a smile and 12 seconds of eye contact. But here's where the story takes its first unexpected turn. Because while Marcus was discovering that Roots and Rhythms had been operating for 3 years, on a shoestring budget, providing services to over 100 families in the community, Zara was dealing with a crisis that threatened to destroy everything she'd built. The landlord had just delivered an eviction notice. Rent would triple in 60 days unless she could find a buyer willing to purchase the building. The asking price, $2.3 million, more money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes of social work. The teenagers who came to the center for homework help, the seniors who found friendship in the weekly programs, the small business owners who'd launched dreams from her workshop space. All of it would disappear unless a miracle walked through her door. Zara sat in her tiny office that night, surrounded by thank you letters from families whose lives had been touched by the center's programs, and made a decision that would change everything. She would fight. She would find a way. She would save the place that had become the beating heart of her community, even if it meant swallowing her pride and asking for help from people who lived in a completely different world. The next morning, Marcus found himself driving through Harlem again, not because of construction or GPS malfunctions, but because something inside him demanded answers to questions he'd never bothered asking before. What was it about her smile? Why couldn't he focus on the things that had driven him for decades? And why did his chest feel tight every time he remembered the way she'd looked at him? Not at his car or his obvious wealth, but directly at him, as if she could see through bulletproof glass and emotional walls to something worth seeing. He parked across the street from Roots and Rhythms and watched children arrive for after-school programs, their backpacks bouncing as they ran toward the center like it was home. Elderly residents sat on folding chairs outside, sharing stories and playing chess. Young mothers pushed strollers while balancing coffee cups in conversation. This wasn't just a building. It was the nucleus of something alive and vibrant and absolutely essential. And then she appeared again, Zara Williams, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that read community over competition. Her hair pulled back in a ponytail that somehow made her look both younger and more determined. She was posting a flyer on the community bulletin board, her movements quick and efficient, but tinged with something that looked like desperation. Marcus made a decision that went against every instinct he'd cultivated over for decades of careful control. He got out of the car, crossed the street, walked directly into the path of the woman who'd been haunting his thoughts for 24 hours. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you could tell me about your programs here." She turned, and he was close enough now to see that her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight, close enough to notice the tiny scar above her left eyebrow, close enough to realize that photographs and distant glimpses hadn't captured half of her beauty. But more than that, and this was what stopped his breath, he was close enough to see the weight she was carrying, the worry lines that hadn't been visible from across the street, the way her smile seemed to require effort. "This time, of course," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Zara Williams, director of Roots and Rhythms. Are you interested in volunteering, or do you have children who might benefit from our programs?" He shook her hand, soft skin, Firm grip, calluses that spoke of real work, and lied smoothly. Just exploring the neighborhood, this seems like an amazing place. What he didn't say: I'm Marcus Blackstone, and I could buy this entire block with pocket change. What he didn't say: your smile has been driving me crazy for 24 hours. What he didn't say: I haven't felt this unsettled since I was 12 years old, and my mother left without saying goodbye. Instead, he let her guide him through the center, listening as she explained programs with passion that made her voice musical. The computer lab where teenagers learn coding, alongside their grandparents, the kitchen where cooking classes doubled as nutrition education and cultural exchange, the small business incubator that had launched 17 successful ventures in 3 years, the art room where children painted murals that told their stories on walls that had once been tagged with despair. Every word she spoke revealed layers of complexity he hadn't expected. This wasn't charity work or community service hours for college applications. This was a calling, a mission. A woman who'd found her purpose in lifting others and refused to apologize for caring more about impact than profit margins. But it was what she didn't say that broke something open in his chest. The way she hesitated before showing him the newest classroom. The quick glance she gave the stack of unpaid bills on her desk. The forced brightness in her voice when she mentioned exciting changes coming soon. Marcus had built his fortune by reading between lines, and every line in Zara's story spelled trouble. How long have you been running this place? He asked as they completed the tour. 3 years of operations, but it's been my dream much longer than that. She paused at the front door, keys jangling in her hand. My grandmother always said that true wealth is measured by how many lives you touch, not how much money you accumulate. I think she'd be proud of what we've built here. Past tense. She'd said what we've built as if it was already over, as if she was speaking at a funeral for dreams that were still breathing, but wouldn't survive much longer. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in walls that had protected him for decades. This woman, this place, this community that had embraced purpose over profit. It represented everything he'd convinced himself didn't exist anymore, everything he'd taught himself not to want or need or believe in. And she was about to lose it all. That night, Marcus sat in his penthouse office, city lights sprawling below him like a circuit board of ambition and greed. His laptop displayed the financial records for Roots and Rhythms, public information, easy enough to access when you knew the right databases. The numbers told a story of impossible dedication. Zara had been paying rent and utilities from her personal savings for the past 6 months, keeping programs running while grants dried up and donations slowed to a trickle. She was 30 days away from losing everything, and she was still showing up every morning with hope in her voice and dreams in her pocket. For the first time in 20 years, Marcus Blackstone was considering something that had nothing to do with profit margins or return on investment. He was considering what it might feel like to be the kind of man who saved things instead of consuming them, the kind of man who built communities instead of just buildings, the kind of man who deserved a smile like Zara's, genuine and unguarded and completely revolutionary. But first, he had to figure out how to cross the bridge between his world and hers without destroying what made her extraordinary in the first place. Because men like him, billionaires who'd forgotten how to feel, didn't get to just walk into places like Roots and Rhythms and play hero without consequences. The question was, what was he willing to risk to find out if love could really break walls that 20 years of isolation had built? And more importantly, what happened when the woman who'd cracked his heart discovered exactly who was hiding behind the concerned neighborhood visitor who'd asked such careful questions about her dreams? But Marcus was about to learn that some decisions can't be made in boardrooms or penthouse offices. Some decisions require the wisdom of someone who'd walked these streets longer than skyscrapers, had scraped the sky, someone like Mama Ruby, 87 years old, sharp as her grandmother's kitchen knife, and sitting on the same Harlem stoop where she'd watched 5 decades of dreams rise and fall. Mama Ruby had survived the civil rights movement, gentrification scares, and 3 different mayors who promised change but delivered disappointment. She'd also watched Marcus Blackstone circle the block in his fancy car 6 times that week, each pass slower than the last, like a shark circling something it couldn't quite decide to devour or protect. You gonna keep driving past, or you gonna park that expensive guilt and come talk to me? She called out Thursday morning as the Bentley crept by at 15 miles per hour. Marcus nearly jumped out of his Italian leather skin. How had she? He parked. Mama Ruby's eyes held secrets and stories, the kind of wisdom that came from surviving everything and learning to read people like weather patterns. She'd been watching Zara grow up since she was knee-high to a grasshopper, watched her turn pain into purpose and dreams into action. And now this man in the $1,000 suit was circling her girl like she was prey. And Mama Ruby needed to know his intentions before she decided whether to bless or bury him. Sit, she commanded, patting the step beside her. Marcus Blackstone, who made senators nervous and CEOs sweat, sat like an obedient schoolboy. You've been watching our Zara, not a question, a fact delivered with the authority of someone who'd seen enough men make enough mistakes to recognize trouble brewing from blocks away. Yes, ma'am. I visited the community center. It's impressive what she's built. His corporate speak sounded hollow in the morning air, thick with authenticity and judgment. Mama Ruby laughed, the sound rich like jazz and sharp like truth. Impressive. Lord have mercy. You sound like them grant committee folks with their fancy words and empty promises. She turned to study his face with X-ray intensity. What you really want with our girl? The question hit like a physical blow, because Marcus didn't have an answer that made sense, even to himself. What did he want? To save her center and disappear, like some anonymous benefactor? To get to know the woman behind the smile that haunted his dreams? To figure out why someone who had everything felt so empty, while someone who had nothing seemed so complete? I don't know, he admitted, the truth scraping his throat raw. I saw her, and something changed. I can't explain it. Mama Ruby nodded, slowly, as if his confusion was a symptom she'd diagnosed before. You know what your problem is? Son, you got money but no meaning, power but no purpose. You think love is something you can buy or negotiate or control from behind bulletproof glass. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than any boardroom threat. But our Zara? She's not for sale, and she's not for playing with. That girl got enough real problems without adding a rich man's midlife crisis to the list. The words should have offended him. Instead, they cracked something open, let light into corners of his soul that had been dark for decades. Then tell me what I should do. First, you stop lying about who you are. Zara's got a heart bigger than Harlem, but she ain't stupid. She's gonna figure out eventually that the concerned neighbor asking questions got more money than God and more secrets than the Pentagon. When she does, you better hope the truth is prettier than the lie. Marcus felt exposed, read, seen in ways that made his expensive defenses useless. And if she never finds out? Mama Ruby's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Baby, you really think you can love someone while pretending to be someone else? That ain't love, that's a performance. And the curtain always falls eventually. She was right, and they both knew it. But admitting the truth meant risking everything. The possibility of knowing Zara, of mattering to her, of being more than just another rich man trying to buy his way into significance. It meant facing rejection not just from her, but from the part of himself that had started believing he could be different. What if I told her the truth and tried to help anyway? What if I could save the center? What if pigs could fly? What if wishes were horses? Mama Ruby stood, brushing invisible dust from her house address. Son, our community has seen plenty of white knights riding in with checkbooks and good intentions. Most of them leave behind more problems than they solve. Zara don't need saving, she needs supporting. There's a difference, and if you can't tell what it is, you got no business being in her life. With that, she disappeared into her building, leaving Marcus alone on the stoop with the weight of truth settling on his shoulders like lead. Blankets, supporting versus saving, partnership versus charity, being worthy versus buying worthiness. That afternoon, he found himself back at roots and rhythms. But this time he didn't have to manufacture reasons. A small crowd had gathered outside, voices raised in heated discussion. Zara stood at the center, holding a clipboard like a shield, trying to maintain order while explaining something that was clearly breaking her heart. "I know. This is hard news," she was saying, her voice steady, but her hands shaking slightly. "But we have 30 days to find a solution. I'm not giving up, and I need all of you to keep believing with me. This community center belongs to all of us, and we're going to fight for it together." An elderly man Marcus recognized from his previous visit stepped forward. "Zara, honey, you've been carrying this load by yourself too long. We got families who can contribute, neighbors who can fundraise. You don't have to do this alone." "Mr. Washington is right," added a young mother with a toddler on her hip. "This place saved my son's life when he was heading down the wrong path. If it takes every penny I got, we're gonna keep these doors open." Marcus watched from the edge of the crowd as the community rallied around Zara, offering everything from bake sale proceeds to jewelry passed down through generations. The amounts were small, $20 here, $50 there, but the commitment was enormous. These people were willing to sacrifice for something they believed in, something that had given their lives meaning and hope. But mathematics was cruel, and Marcus could calculate the shortfall in his head. Even if every person in the crowd contributed everything they could afford, it wouldn't be enough, not even close. They were trying to fill an ocean with teacups, driven by love but defeated by logistics. Zara seemed to understand this too. Her smile never wavered as she thanked each contributor. But Marcus could see the weight pressing down on her shoulders, the impossible arithmetic playing behind her eyes. She was watching her dream die in slow motion while trying to keep hope alive for everyone who depended on her strength. That's when Marcus made a decision that went against every rule of engagement he'd ever learned in business. He stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm new to the neighborhood, but I've been impressed by what you've built here. Is there a formal fundraising campaign, a way for people like me to contribute?" Zara's eyes found his across the circle of concerned faces, and something flickered there, recognition, surprise, maybe a touch of suspicion. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Blake," he lied smoothly. Marcus Blake. Close enough to the truth to feel less like deception. Different enough to buy him time to figure out how to navigate the gap between who he was and who he wanted to be. "Mr. Blake." She tested the name, her gaze lingering on his expensive watch, his hand-tailored suit, the way he stood like someone accustomed to being listened to. "We don't have a formal campaign yet, but we're working on several options. Could I get your contact information? I'd love to send you details when we have a plan in place." He handed her a business card, one of the generic ones he kept for situations requiring anonymity, with just his name and a phone number. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and that simple contact sent electricity up his arm like he'd touched a live wire. "I'll be in touch," she said, pocketing the card without looking at it. But as the crowd dispersed and people drifted back to their daily routines, Zara lingered. She stood in front of the community center, looking up at the building that held her dreams, and Marcus could see the exact moment her public composure cracked. Her shoulders sagged, her head dropped. For just a few seconds, she let herself feel the weight of impending failure. Marcus wanted to cross the distance between them, wanted to tell her that $2.3 million was pocket change to him, that he could wire the money that afternoon and save everything she'd built. But Mama Ruby's words echoed in his head, supporting versus saving. There's a difference. Instead, he approached carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal that might bolt or bite. "Rough day?" he asked softly. Zara looked up, wiping quickly at her eyes before managing a smile that didn't quite reach its destination. "Just challenging. But that's okay. The best things in life are worth fighting for, right?" "Right," he agreed, though privately he wondered if he'd ever fought for anything beyond quarterly profits and market share. "Can I ask you something? What made you start this place? What drives you to keep going when things get difficult?" She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to decide how much truth to share with a stranger who might disappear tomorrow. "My little brother," she finally said. His name was David. He was 8 years younger than me, smart as anything, but he got caught up with the wrong crowd when I was away at college. By the time I came home to help him, it was too late. He'd been shot in a drive-by. Wrong place at the wrong time. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He'd never lost anyone to violence. Never had to navigate grief that came with questions about what could have been prevented. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words inadequate but sincere. "The thing is," Zara continued, her voice gaining strength, "there was nowhere for kids like David to go after school. Nowhere safe to do homework, learn new skills, find mentors who cared. So I promised myself, and him, that I'd create that place. Every child who walks through these doors is David. Every success story is the life he should have had." Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves to accommodate new understanding. This wasn't just community service or career ambition. This was love transformed into action, grief channeled into hope, one woman's determination to ensure no other family experienced her loss. And he was falling in love with her purpose almost as much as he was falling in love with her. "That's incredible," he managed. "Your brother would be proud of what you've built." "I hope so." She looked up at the building again, her expression mixing determination with desperation. "I just wish I was better at the business side of things. I can run programs and connect with people all day long. But when it comes to fundraising and financial planning and dealing with landlords who see dollar signs instead of dreams." She shrugged, a gesture that tried to convey casual acceptance, but revealed bone-deep frustration. This was his moment. Marcus could feel it like a door opening, an opportunity to bridge the gap between his resources and her need. But instead of offering immediate solutions, he found himself asking, "What if you had help? Someone who understood the business side, but respected what you're trying to accomplish?" Zara's eyes sharpened with interest and wariness in equal measure. "What kind of help?" "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted, "but I'd like to find out. Would you be willing to have coffee sometime? I'd love to hear more about your vision for this place." The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure was safe to cross. Marcus held his breath, waiting for her answer while trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. He was playing with fire while sitting on a powder keg of secrets, but for the first time in 20 years, the risk felt worth taking. "Coffee," Zara repeated slowly. "Are you asking me out, Mr. Blake, or offering business consultation?" The question was fair, and Marcus realized he didn't have a clean answer. Was this attraction disguised as altruism, charity motivated by infatuation? The lines were blurring in ways that would have sent him running 6 months ago. "Maybe both," he said, his honesty surprising them both. "I'm interested in helping the center, but I'd be lying if I said that was my only motivation. You intrigue me, Zara Williams, your passion, your dedication, the way you turn problems into possibilities. I'd like to know you better, if you're open to that." She studied his face for a long moment, and Marcus felt like he was being evaluated by someone who'd learned to read people for survival. "One coffee," she finally agreed. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., at Lennox Coffee on 125th Street. We'll talk about the center, and we'll see what kind of man you really are, Marcus Blake." As she walked away, Marcus realized he was in trouble deeper than the Mariana Trench, because tomorrow, over coffee that would probably cost less than his morning newspaper, he'd have to figure out how to be honest without revealing everything, how to offer help without insulting her independence, and how to fall in love without destroying the very thing that made her extraordinary. And somewhere in Harlem, Mama Ruby was probably shaking her head, knowing exactly what kind of storm was brewing and wondering if either of them would survive it. With their hearts intact, 10 a.m. at Lennox Coffee arrived like Judgment Day wrapped in morning sunshine. Marcus had changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on jeans and a button-down shirt that cost more than most people's rent, but looked casual enough to avoid suspicion. He arrived 15 minutes early and claimed a corner table where he could watch the door and plan his escape routes, like the emotional coward he was trying not to be. Zara walked in at exactly 10 o'clock, wearing a yellow sundress that made her look like captured sunlight, her hair flowing loose around her shoulders in a style that was both effortless and breathtaking. She spotted him immediately, offered that smile that had started this whole beautiful disaster. And Marcus felt his carefully rehearsed talking points evaporate like morning mist. "Good morning, Marcus Blake," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I have to admit, I did some research on you last night." Marcus's blood turned to ice water. Game over, she knew. His deception was exposed, and now he'd have to watch disappointment replace the warmth in her eyes. Watch her realize that he was just another rich man playing games with regular people's lives. Oh. He managed, his voice barely steady. Zara pulled out her phone, scrolling to what looked like a Google search. Marcus Blake. Surprisingly common name. "I found a Marcus Blake who sells insurance in Detroit, one who teaches high school math in Portland, and a Marcus Blake who apparently makes artisanal cheese in Vermont." She looked up, her expression mixing amusement with suspicion. "Funny thing though, none of them matched the man sitting across from me." The moment stretched between them like a tightrope over an abyss. Marcus could lie again, compound the deception with more elaborate fiction, or he could jump into the void and trust that someone who built community centers and turned grief into hope might have room in her heart for a broken billionaire trying to learn how to be human. "Zara," he began, then stopped, started again. "My name is Marcus, that much is true. But my last name isn't Blake." She leaned back in her chair, coffee untouched, studying him with the intensity of someone who'd learned that survival sometimes depended on reading people correctly. "Who are you really?" "Marcus Blackstone." The name fell between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. "Blackstone Financial. You might have heard of it." The change in her expression was immediate and devastating. Recognition dawned, followed quickly by hurt, anger, and something that looked like betrayal. "Blackstone Financial. The Marcus Blackstone. Net worth $8 billion. The man who buys companies and fires half the employees for efficiency. That Marcus Blackstone." Each word hit like a physical blow because she wasn't wrong. His company's reputation was built on profit maximization and cost reduction, which often meant human costs. He'd never lost sleep over quarterly reports that showed improved margins alongside reduced headcounts. But hearing it described by someone who actually cared about people made him feel sick. "Yes," he said simply, "that's me." Zara stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor, drawing looks from other customers. "You've been playing games with me, with my community, coming around asking questions, pretending to be some concerned neighbor when you're exactly the kind of person who..." She stopped, took a breath, lowered her voice. "Do you have any idea what people like you have done to neighborhoods like mine? How many communities have been destroyed by men in expensive suits who see dollar signs instead of human beings?" "Zara, please sit down. Let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you thought it would be fun to slum it in Harlem. How you decided to see what the poor people were doing with their cute little community center before you probably buy the building and turn it into luxury condos." Her voice was getting louder again, and Marcus could feel the attention of everyone in the coffee shop focusing on their table. But more than the embarrassment, he could feel something precious slipping away, something he'd only just begun to understand he wanted. It's not like that. I saw you, and something changed. I've never felt anything like what I felt when I saw you smile. And I know that sounds ridiculous coming from someone who lied about his name, but it's true. You made me want to be different, better." Zara's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Different, better? You mean you want to add saved a community center to your philanthropy resume? Get some good press to balance out all those layoffs and acquisitions?" "No." The word came out louder than he intended, causing a middle-aged woman at the next table to jump. He lowered his voice, leaned forward desperately. "Zara, I know how this looks. I know I handled it wrong from the beginning. But everything I've felt, everything I've said about being impressed by what you've built, that's real. The attraction, the admiration, the way you've made me question everything I thought I knew about what matters in life, all of that is real." She studied his face for a long moment, and Marcus held his breath while she decided his fate. "Real," she repeated slowly. "You want to know what's real, Marcus Blackstone? 28 days until eviction. Families who depend on our programs having nowhere else to go. Children who need safe spaces to do homework and dream about futures. That's real. Your feelings about my smile. That's just another rich man's fantasy. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. You want to do something real? Write a check, save the center. Then stay away from me and let me do my job without having to wonder what games you're playing. And then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone at a table for two with cold coffee and the wreckage of something that might have been beautiful if he'd been brave enough to lead with truth instead of fear. The next 3 weeks passed like a fevered dream of regret and revelation. Marcus tried to focus on work, but quarterly projections felt meaningless when measured against Zara's accusation that he saw dollar signs instead of human beings. He tried to lose himself in acquisition meetings, but every corporate presentation reminded him of her voice explaining programs with passion that made spreadsheets look like crayon drawings. He drove through Harlem twice, but couldn't bring himself to get out of the car. What was the point? She'd made her position clear. He could write the check. $2.3 million was pocket change to him, but money without trust was just another form of manipulation. On a Thursday morning that felt like the end of the world, Marcus found himself back on Mama Ruby's stoop. She was sitting in her usual spot, wearing a house dress the color of autumn leaves and an expression that suggested she'd been expecting him. You look like hell warmed over, she observed without preamble. I told her the truth, Marcus said, collapsing onto the step beside her. About who I am. She hates me. She don't hate you, baby. She hates being lied to. There's a difference. Mama Ruby studied his face with X-ray intensity. Question is, what you gonna do about it? I don't know. She wants me to write a check and disappear. Maybe that's what I should do, HMM. Mama Ruby was quiet for so long Marcus thought she might have fallen asleep. Then, you know what? Your real problem is, I'm sure you're going to tell me, you're still thinking like a rich man, thinking money solves everything, thinking grand gestures make up for broke trust. But our Zara don't want your money. She wants your honesty. She don't want your charity. She wants your partnership. You understand the difference? Marcus wasn't sure he did, but he nodded anyway. Partnership means showing up when it's hard, means putting her dreams first, not your guilt, means proving you changed, not just saying it. She stood with the careful grace of someone whose bones remembered decades of dancing and struggle. Center's having an emergency community meeting tonight, 7 o'clock. You want to know what real looks like? Show up, but don't you dare walk in there talking about checks and tax deductions. Walk in there ready to roll up your sleeves and do the work. That evening, Marcus stood outside Roots and Rhythms for the 3rd time in a month. But this felt different. This felt like stepping off a cliff and hoping someone had taught him how to fly. Through the windows, he could see the community gathered in folding chairs, their faces worried but determined. At the front of the room, Zara stood behind a small podium, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that read community over competition. Her hair pulled back in a ponytail that somehow made her look both vulnerable and fierce. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The conversation stopped. Every face turned toward him, some curious, some suspicious, all protective of the woman at the front of the room. Zara's eyes met his across the crowded space, and he saw surprise flicker there, followed by something that might have been hope before her professional mask slipped back into place. Mr. Blackstone, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I wasn't sure you'd come. You invited the community, he replied, moving toward an empty chair in the back row. I live in this community now too. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered his name to their neighbor. Someone else Googled him on their phone and whistled softly at whatever they found. But no one asked him to leave. For the next 2 hours, Marcus listened. He heard single mothers talk about needing after-school care so they could work second jobs. He heard teenagers describe how the center's coding classes had opened doors to internships at tech companies. He heard seniors explain how the weekly chess tournaments had become the highlight of their week, bringing friendship to people who might otherwise spend days without meaningful conversation. And through it all, Zara orchestrated the discussion with a grace that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. She asked questions that drew out quiet voices, validated concerns without making false promises, and somehow maintained hope while being honest about how dire their situation had become. When the formal discussion ended and people began to disperse, Marcus approached the front of the room. Zara was packing papers into a worn messenger bag, her movements efficient but tired. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said quietly. She looked up, and for a moment her professional composure slipped, revealing the exhaustion and fear she'd been hiding all evening. "I didn't think you'd actually show up. I'm trying to be the kind of man who shows up," he said. "I'm not sure I know how yet, but I'm trying." Zara finished packing her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and studied his face in the harsh fluorescent light. "What do you want, Marcus, really? Not the pretty words or the romantic gestures. What do you actually want from me, from this situation?" The question was fair, and Marcus realized he'd been asking himself the same thing for weeks. "I want to help save this place, but not because it'll make me feel better about myself or look good in the business journals. I want to help because you've shown me what real purpose looks like, and I've never wanted anything more than to be worthy of that, of you. And after we save it, what then? Do you go back to your penthouse and your corporate acquisitions, feeling good about your charity work? Do I become your good deed, your proof that you're not just another predatory billionaire?" Her words stung because they echoed his own fears. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never been in love before, Zara. I don't know how any of this works, but I know that these past 3 weeks without you have been the worst of my life. And I know that listening to this community tonight has meant more to me than any board meeting or profit report ever has. I know that I want to learn how to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you." Zara was quiet for a long moment, keys jangling in her hand as she weighed his words against his actions, his promises against his past. "One chance," she finally said. "Not a chance to save me or rescue this place like some white knight riding in with solutions. A chance to earn your way into this community, to prove that you understand the difference between helping and taking over. You mess this up, Marcus Blackstone, and it's over. No second chances, no do-overs, no buying your way back in. I understand. I don't think you do, not yet. But maybe you'll learn." She headed toward the door, then paused. "Emergency fundraising committee meets tomorrow at 6 p.m. If you want to help, show up ready to work, not to write checks. We need someone who understands business planning, grant applications, sponsorship development. Think you can handle that without trying to buy your way to hero status?" Marcus felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening onto possibilities he'd never imagined. "Yes," he said, "I can handle that." "We'll see," Zara replied, but there was something in her voice that sounded almost like hope. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same community center, but everything had changed. The walls displayed new murals painted by local artists funded through grants he'd helped write. The computer lab hummed with upgraded equipment purchased through corporate sponsorships he'd negotiated. The kitchen sparkled with appliances donated by companies, impressed by the center's measurable community impact documented in reports. He'd learned to write in Zara's voice instead of corporate speak. But the real change wasn't in the building, it was in him. Marcus Blackstone, who'd spent 42 years measuring success in stock prices and quarterly profits, now measured it in GED certificates earned by teenage mothers, in small businesses launched by entrepreneurs who'd found mentorship and microloans, in the laughter of children who had safe places to dream about impossible futures that were becoming possible one program at a time. And tonight, surrounded by the community that had taught him what wealth really meant, he was about to ask Zara Williams to marry him, not with a ring that cost more than most people's houses, though he'd bought one, because some traditions were worth keeping, not in some fancy restaurant where the champagne cost more than the center's monthly budget, but here, in the place where she'd taught him that love wasn't something you purchased or negotiated or controlled, but something you earned through showing up day after day, with your whole heart and your sleeves rolled up. The same community that had gathered 6 months ago to face the possibility of losing everything was gathered again tonight, but this time they were celebrating. The center was not just saved but thriving. Zara's programs had expanded to 3 other neighborhoods, and Marcus had learned that the difference between charity and love was the difference between writing checks and changing diapers, between grand gestures and small daily acts of service. He'd learned that true partnership meant following her lead, amplifying her voice, using his resources to make her dreams bigger, instead of making himself feel important. He'd learned that supporting someone meant making them stronger, not making them dependent. Most importantly, he'd learned that the walls around his heart hadn't been broken by some dramatic revelation or romantic gesture. They'd been dissolved slowly, day by day, by a woman who'd showed him what it looked like to build something instead of just acquiring it, to create value instead of just extracting it, to love people instead of just using them. As Zara finished, thanking the volunteers and donors who'd made their latest expansion possible, Marcus caught her eye and nodded toward the small office where they'd shared so many late-night planning sessions over the past months. She excused herself and followed him, her expression curious but trusting in ways that still took his breath away. "Everything okay?" she asked, settling into the chair across from the desk where she'd first explained her vision for transforming grief into hope. Marcus dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring box that contained not just a diamond, but a promise to keep showing up, keep earning his place in her life and her community. "Zara Williams," he said, his voice steady despite the fact that his heart was beating loud enough to power the building. "You've taught me that love isn't something you fall into. It's something you build day by day, choice by choice, by proving you're worthy of the gift someone gives you when they trust you with their dreams." Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling, that smile that had started this whole beautiful journey. "You've made me a better man, a better human being, someone who finally understands what it means to be truly wealthy. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life earning the privilege of being your partner, your supporter, your co-conspirator in making the world a little more like the one you see in your heart?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Marcus Blackstone, but only if you promise to keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep being the kind of man who sees people instead of profit margins." "I promise," he said, slipping the ring onto her finger. "For the rest of my life, I promise." And somewhere in Harlem, Mama Ruby was probably smiling, knowing that sometimes the most unlikely love stories become the most beautiful ones, especially when they're built on foundations of truth, community, and the revolutionary idea that real wealth is measured not in what you have, but in what you give, and how many lives you touch along the way. Because in the end, Marcus learned that love doesn't break down walls. It teaches you that you never needed them in the first place. It shows you that the very things you thought would protect you were actually keeping you from everything that makes life worth living. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it gives you a second chance to build something beautiful where those walls used to be. The billionaire who swore off love had learned that the most expensive things in life, trust, partnership, community, genuine connection, can't be bought. They can only be earned. And sometimes, they're worth more than all the money in the world. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to tear down walls and build bridges instead. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love, transformation, and the beautiful messiness of being human. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and the power of a smile to change everything.